So I'm going to speak in kind of notes that have space between them and activate the work itself, and then the work in its context and how it relates to the practice that kind of all of us as artists who work within this Afrofuturistic way, how we work in the same kind of realm. So first I want you to think about forces. Think about forces, the forces that are actually holding you up in the room. And just imagine that there was a larger force that actually pulled you up and kept you aloft as you walk, even during times of struggle. How do you stay up in the world? Think about forces. The thing about Afrofuturism is that there's something about it which connects science, music, imagination, diaspora, and some basic physics, like how do we stay up in the world when things are trying to hold us down? How do we transcend that? Where is that magic coming from? How did people look to the stars and escape a regime and kind of, through a night, come into a morning suddenly free? How does that happen? So this is a story of forces, the forces that hold us up. What about this mirror? A mirror, in a way, is a portal. The mirror images our dimension. We all love Star Trek, Star Wars, and science fiction is a way that we can actually imagine our reality just like this one, but parallel and maybe more charged or magical, or some rule gets broken that then everything else changes. So with a mirror, you have immediately another dimension. And again, those forces, what's holding you up and what's pushing you down? How do you lift that up? Maybe you can fly. As you go down, maybe you go up. 1965, Selma, Amelia Boynton Robinson. Born in 1911, Amelia Boynton Robinson was born in Alabama, near Selma. To have all of this power inside of her, in 1934, she already decided that she wanted to run for office one day. This is at a time when African Americans didn't even vote legally in Alabama. In 1950s, she actually met with Martin Luther King and helped to open her home to the civil rights movement, and her home became this kind of portal of that activism. People met, talked, dreamt, and their dreams ended up becoming legislated action. But first it was just a dream, words, waves disturbing the air. So we talk about forces at this time in Selma, in the depiction of the photograph that Hank has cut out a photograph and placed it on this portal of the mirror. And all the other details fall away. So we have this moment, and Amelia's going down. And she ended up going unconscious, and her photograph, the photograph of her unconscious body, went around the world and changed the minds of people around the world. How can the body become a metaphor? How can suddenly everything else fall away and almost like a rainbow come out, right? That kind of zap of energy. So there's something celestial, something kind of space magic time frame continuum, something that Sun Ra would talk about. Space is the place. Now is the time. I can draw from the pyramids. I'm drawing from the Nubians. You can't stop me. Even though it's a black and white photograph, the mirror opens it up for that green screen in which anything can happen. And we can be protesting. It's 2017. It's the 60s. It's now. It's then. It's the past. As if we can just open our arms and actually have around us all of the moments accessible around us at once. And this whole show actually has a feeling of choreography in which It's like, where are our bodies in space at this time? And if I move this way, if I move this way, okay, if the person next to you, if you kind of come close to them, just kind of come closer, kind of touch shoulders, okay, suddenly you can become like a unit. Suddenly you can have a certain power, right? So what is the energy around our bodies at all times? Do we have access to that? When you're going down, who's bringing you up? And then what are those invisible forces, those energies that can actually transport us to that other dimension? Time. There's something here about time. But time, in a way, just like this mirror, it starts to disappear. And there's something about utopia where when you line everything up, when you line up the person who's on the Underground Railroad, and you line up the person at Selma, and you line up the person now who's fighting, it's like all the time disappears and collapses, and we're left with this kind of openness. But it's difficult because does the action disappear? Are we repeating the same thing again and again? This brings me back to like the idea of the gospel, right? Think about the Old Testament. You're at the River Jordan. You're at the gates. You're making the passage. These metaphors were activated, Old Testament metaphors activated by civil rights, activated by pop songs. Even till today, people say, you know, I'm crossing that river. So these things never really go out of style. So the fragment, I think this whole show is united by the idea of the fragment. By taking all the detail away, you might be allowing everything to rush in. And how can we have access to those invisible colors? You know, when people like Immanuel Kant talked about science turning towards the invisible, it meant that we would be looking for not what we can see and what we can hear, but things that are beyond our perception, kind of growing and buzzing around us. And that's what Afrofuturism accesses, is the sense of these other systems. And whether you can bend notes like Coltrane, or you can dance, or you can imagine another reality, even as you're being pulled down. This buoyancy, incredible. Thank you. Any questions at all?
Can you talk about so this is less about the work, but more of your experience, and what brought you, or when did Afrofuturism when did you discover Afrofuturism in a defined way?
The term itself wasn't coined until the 90s, early 90s, and then became more popular in the late 90s through a series of radio programs and discussions. But what's interesting is the idea of the Afrofuture was already existing in Black culture. And I think in any kind of diasporic culture, where you have to look for fragments of information, and instead of being dismayed by the fact that they're fragmented, you're actually invigorated by the abstraction of that. So learning about the pyramids, learning about systems and social practices that really were not documented, but fragments are available. And this is the thing that I think really makes it so that someone could work in an Afrofuturistic way without even having that term. And I think that what's interesting here is like you have Mike Kelly in the back gallery. Look, that's a really great piece to think about with this one in relation, because I don't think necessarily when an artist makes a move, you put two things together. In this case, this is actually responding to a Pistoletto work from the 60s in which he puts a photo on a mirror. And that action is a way to kind of negate the photograph and also like explode it. And it's about dreaming and fantasy, right? So when we look at the Mike Kelly work, he's actually imagining Superman and the land where he's supposed to be from. And he makes a visualization of this kind of gorgeous, crazy, crystal-looking land. And it's really about something with comic books, but it's also epic. And I think that this idea that you're part of a larger epic is what unites all of this. And for me, my first impression of that was to actually hear a lot of live jazz music as like a really little kid, like 4 or 5 years old. and hearing people like bend notes and make all these improvisations based off of structures, and realizing that it was like almost like planets or almost like anything free and open, but really had a physics to it. And so as I got older, I realized that that music, those experimentations, were probably my first experience with this kind of sense of freedom in building your own worlds, even in a moment. So I think I'll end on that note, because like really it's about this idea that with the imagination, it's so unstoppable, the river of energy you can produce. And I hope that we really, during these times, draw from that river.